I will start by acknowledging that CNL would like to acknowledge that we are gathered in the Algonquin Nation, whose traditional and unceded territory it is we are in. I would also like to start with some introductions of who is on the line and who will be presenting today. I'll start with myself. I'm Mitch McKay. I'm the ERM, or Environmental Remediation Management Stakeholder Relations Manager, and happy to be here today. I have with me some of the project staff on the near surface disposal facility and the nuclear power demonstration closure project, and I will let them introduce themselves. So I'll just call out their name and let them come online and say who they are. So Megan.
Morning, everyone. My name is Megan Vickard. I'm the director for the Near Surface Disposal Facility project, and I'm looking forward to our discussion here today.
I have Sandra.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Sandra Fott. I'm the manager of Nsdf regulatory approvals, and just wanted to wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day before we kicked off.
Thanks, Sandra. I have Brian.
Good morning, Brian Wilcox. I'm the director for the Npd Reactor closure project. Thanks for everyone participating today.
And I have Katie.
Good morning. I'm the manager of regulatory approvals for nuclear power demonstration, or Npd Closure project. Good morning.
Thank you. Okay, so just some housekeeping before we get started. We're going to start off with the Nsdf project. This is going to be fact or fiction theme. So throughout the presentation, there will be interactive poll questions. We're trying something different today. You can ask questions at any time by typing into the chat function in Zoom. And we will have time to go through those questions during the Q&A period there, hopefully around 10:55 for Nsdf and around 11:25 for after the Npd closure project. And we'll do our best to respond to questions following the presentations, but those that maybe we don't have, if we don't have the right people on the line today, we'll commit to getting back to you with the answer at a later date. If there are questions that come up afterwards, you can always get a hold of us at our email address that's there in the slide, ermstakeholder@cnl.ca, and we'd be happy to engage with you on any questions or concerns you might have. And a quick note, we've been getting some feedback in some of our presentations. There's pictures that may not look like they're safe right now because of the pandemic, but I'll just point out that some of the pictures we used are pre-pandemic, so it may look like we're not following the new rules around the pandemic, but in fact, we are taking the utmost precautions. So just note that there is some images in here that are pre-pandemic. There is French and English available. So if you press the interpretation button there on the bottom of your screen in Zoom, you can have this presentation and Q&A session in both official languages. And I will point out that we are recording this session, so we will make it available on our YouTube channel after this session is complete. So with that, I will hand it over to Megan Vickard.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Mitch, and thank you for joining us today on St. Patrick's Day. We thought we'd play a little game today called Fact or Fiction, and it's all about making sure you get the facts about our two projects. So Sandra and I are going to rotate on themes, and we hope you enjoy it. As we post a statement, a box will come up for you to chat in whether or not you believe it's a fact, the statement is a fact or fiction, and then we'll provide the facts. Next slide, please. So the first statement, there is contamination in the environment at the Chalk River site. So let's go ahead and vote on that. Is that statement fact or fiction? So I'll just give everyone a chance to weigh in. And once the polling is done, the results will pop up as to what everyone polled, fact or fiction. All right, excellent. So most of you did vote that that was a fact. So let's get that out of the way. This is a fact. There is contamination of the environment at the Chalk River site. This is why we need Nsdf. At Chalk River, we have performed years of Nobel Prize winning research. At CNL, at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, we have supported the production of more than 1 million medical isotopes. But as a result, we do get a byproduct of waste. That waste is at the Chalk River Laboratory site. Performing research activities and doing science and technology does create waste. Over the years, we have managed this waste in a consistent way, but best practices do evolve with different regulations and engineering and technology available. The proposed near-surface disposal facility will allow Canadian Nuclear Laboratories to dispose of low-level waste using the modern technology. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories takes its obligation to address federal nuclear liabilities very seriously. We carry out these activities in support with the goal of achieving responsible environmental management. Next slide, please. These are some photos. On your left-hand side is a photo of some earliest waste emplacements. You can see that, unfortunately, at the time, waste was placed directly in sand trenches. On your right-hand side of the slide is a picture of some recent investigation work we've carried out to assess the level of contamination in the soil. So much of the early solid waste was placed in these sand trenches, and that was acceptable method at the time. We know that's not true nowadays. That practice, though, has led to contamination in the surrounding environment, in the soil and the groundwater. At CNL, we do monitor this environmental contamination, and we intercept it and we treat it. But the best principle for cleaning up a site is to always remove the source and contain and isolate that source of the contamination properly. This is why we need the near-surface disposal facility. We know we need to do better, and we have a very large environmental cleanup mission underway and planned for the Chalk River site. Leaving this historic waste in its current configuration is non-environmentally responsible, but the near-surface disposal facility is a key enabler to that cleanup mission. We need to do this now and not to leave it for future generations. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories is of the opinion that the near-surface disposal project will result in an improvement in the current conditions at the Chalk River site, and it reinforces good environmental stewardship. Sandra, over to you for the next topic.
Thanks, Megan. So we have our next poll. Fact or fiction, the proposed location for the near-surface disposal facility is unsafe. So you can vote whether or not this is fact or fiction. All right, so 10% of you have said this is a fact and 90% have said it's a fiction. So the 90% of you are correct. This is fiction. The proposed location for the near-surface disposal facility was designed specifically for the site. The baseliner system will be positioned on a bedrock ridge in the eastern region of the engineered containment mound. Protection of the Ottawa River was a key factor in considering the Nsdf project location. The bedrock ridge naturally forces water away from the Ottawa River. Although the location is just over a kilometer from the river, The groundwater transit time from the proposed location of the Nsdf is between 7 and 12 years, much longer than alternative locations on site that appear farther apart from the river. The Nsdf has also been designed to withstand extreme weather events such as earthquakes, tornadoes, forest fires, and major storms. The base of the facility is located approximately 50 meters above the Ottawa River, much higher than any floodwaters that might occur. Next slide. So as part of the alternative means assessment for the Nsdf project, 15 sites at the Chalk River Labs were examined as possible locations. The preferred site met all the criteria for the size needed, proximity to the main campus for safe monitoring and operation of the facility, low flood risk, protection of species at risk, and geotechnical qualities. The photos on the top of this slide are part of the geotechnical investigation that was done in support of the near surface disposal facility design. As mentioned, the preferred site is located along a bedrock ridge that naturally forces water directly away from the Ottawa River. The bedrock also creates a foundation for the engineered containment mound, which has been used in the overall design. The base of the proposed Nsdf is approximately 163 meters above sea level, or about 50 meters above current water levels of the Ottawa River. And again, the design is robust and will survive significant seismic events. So that's a 1 in 10,000 year seismic events. There's no evidence that a seismic event of this magnitude has ever occurred in this region. I'm just going to add in a little fun fact here. Some of you may have heard that there was an earthquake near Kemptville, Ontario on the weekend. So that earthquake had a magnitude of 3.3 on the Richter scale, and the epicenter was about 213 kilometers from the Nsdf site. The site actually has micro seismometers on throughout the Chalk River site, and this earthquake did not register at Chalk River. However, I can tell you that the earthquake that the Nsdf is designed for is about 1,250 times bigger than what was experienced in Kemptville. Move on to the next slide and back over to Megan.
Thank you, Sandra. So the next question for our participants is: the mound will have highly radioactive waste, hazardous chemicals, and heavy metals. So please weigh in. Is this statement fact or fiction? Giving everyone an opportunity to weigh in whether or not they believe that that is fact or fiction. Okay, and once everyone's done voting, we'll have a poll that pops up. All right, so most of you have, 84% of you have identified that as fiction, and you would be correct. That statement is fiction. The Nsdf, or the near surface disposal facility, will only contain low-level radioactive waste. That is what is appropriate for a near surface disposal facility. The waste will be materials such as soil from the environmental remediation work that we want to do at the Chalk River site, and demolition debris from removing some redundant facilities and old facilities we have so that we can revitalize the campus. We also have general trash items like protective clothing and equipment or wipes that become contaminated from the operations that we have at Chalk River. There will be no highly radioactive waste in Nsdf. There will be no fuels, and there will be no irradiated reactor cores. Low-level waste is defined by the International Atomic Energy Agency and by Canadian standards as waste mostly comprised of short-lived radionuclides having limited long-lived radionuclides. As a result, the total activity of the Nsdf, or the facility, will be greatly reduced in the first 100 years, and the radioactive concentrations after the 100 years quickly begins to approach natural background concentrations that you would find in our surroundings. For the non-radiological components, or the hazardous waste that people generally use as that term, Nsdf will meet the intent of the requirements specified in provincial regulations. That's Ontario Regulation 347, General Waste Management. So that limits the amount of of non-radiological constituents that can be in the waste. This ensures the protection of the environment and the public in the long term. This ensures that quantities and concentrations of metals, organics, chemical compounds are acceptable and are at limits that will, at levels that will limit the leaching potential from the facility. So this waste will not end up in the environment. 90% of the waste is already at the Chalk River site, which is why we want to build it at the Chalk River site. 5% of the waste will come from hospitals and universities, which CNL provides as a service to small waste generators so that they don't have to come up with their own waste disposal options. Another 5% will come from other ACL sites because CNL and ACL are interested in minimizing the number of waste repositories that we need for our Canadian operations. Only materials that are historically ACL or Canadian Nuclear Laboratories will be received into the near surface disposal facility, and only if they meet the stringent waste acceptance criteria that we develop and that will be accepted by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission if the project proceeds. Next slide, please. So now I want to talk about why receiving low-level waste into the near surface disposal facility is appropriate. The facility is designed for the waste inventory and the physical characteristics of the site. The disposal system design utilizes all of the best practices that are available internationally to ensure that we isolate and contain short-lived radionuclides and allows for substantial decay of this waste before the engineered barriers exceed its design life. The disposal system itself includes multi-barrier liner and cover systems. So there's numerous layers as what you can see in this figure. The synthetic materials such as the high-density polyethylene geomembrane have a design life of 550 years. Now, if you remember, because we're only low-level waste, the inventory is going to greatly reduce in the first 100 years. So our system, our design life exceeds or is commensurate with the hazard of the waste and when we expect it to decay. The clay is expected to have a service life of thousands of years. So you can see clay is an important piece of our base liner, which will ensure that there's an isolation of our waste from the environment. Also, the performance of a high-density polyethylene geomembrane has been tested by international experts and world-renowned experts in geomembrane technology. And that testing program has shown and demonstrated in the models that the surface life of the membrane is expected to approach 2,000 years. So that exceeds what our models and our assumptions have used. So our assumptions are conservative, and the facility is well designed for the inventory that we are proposing to place into it. The design and safety analysis of the near surface disposal facility has been performed by qualified individuals and experienced individuals, both in our own staff and independent contractor staff. We have learned from facilities such as Port Hope, Port Granby, and other international examples for engineered containment mounds. Many of our critical design elements have been analyzed and peer-reviewed by independent third parties to ensure that the quality and accuracy of the results are appropriate. Over to you, Sandra.
Okay, so our next fact or fiction is on radiation levels. So the poll is the Nsdf will emit an unsafe level of radiation. Fact or fiction? We'll get the results here in a second. So 98% of you said this is fiction. So 98% of you are correct. So there are stringent, standard, and regulated radiation controls that will be in place throughout the Nsdf project. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories Radiation Protection Program is designed and implemented so that CNL complies with or exceeds the level of radiation safety that's required by regulations pursuant to the Nuclear Safety and Control Act, as well as CNL's health and safety policy. For the Nsdf project, we will limit doses to employees and members of the public to levels as low as reasonably achievable socio and economic factors being taken into account, otherwise known as the ALERA principle. This is achieved by example, by implementing zoning, access control measures, providing process equipment segregation, establishment of radiation alarms, and through operator training and approved procedures. Next slide. So everyone is exposed to levels of background radiation depending on where they live in the world. So this graphic shows some different levels of radiation you get from everyday activities. So most Canadians receive about 2,000 microsieverts of background radiation per year. On this graphic, that's around 11 o'clock. This slide shows some of the other sources of radiation. So that can include food we eat, medical procedures such as x-rays, or going on an airplane. The estimated dose as a result of the Nsdf project is a fraction of what the public receives. It's estimated to be 50 times lower than the regulatory public dose limit of 10,000 microsieverts a year, which is at 8 o'clock on this figure. During operations, the dose that a member of the public would receive would be less than you would receive on a flight from Vancouver to Toronto. Over to Megan.
Thanks, Sandra. So the next statement, there's only 2 more statements left in your voting. Disposal will lead to abandonment of radioactive waste. So please go ahead and vote whether or not you believe that is fact or fiction. So again, once everyone is done voting, the polling box will appear and we'll see what everyone, how everyone weighed in. All right, so 87% of you said that that is fiction, and you would be correct. That statement is fiction. There are absolutely no plans to abandon near-surface disposal facility or the low-level reactive waste. We are planning for institutional controls, and institutional controls are activities such as monitoring and surveillance to continue for as long as necessary. Within our environmental impact statement, we have used 300 years as a planning assumption. However, we will continue regulatory controls and oversight for as long as needed or as long as deemed necessary. Although the Nsdf, or the near surface disposal facility, has been designed to ensure passive safety, which means that there's no human intervention required once we close the site. So although we've planned for passive safety during the institutional control period, so after we close the sites, say in about 70 years or so, we will have inspection surveillance activities. And that's to ensure that the integrity of the disposal facility is performing as we anticipated. And then if it is not, we would intervene and correct the system. But we certainly do believe that the system has been robustly designed to ensure passive safety. So the monitoring activities will verify that the performance continues to demonstrate compliance with the environmental assessment predictions that we have in the environmental impact statement and future safety assessments. We will also have controls on the land usage, very similar to what you would see in any other land disposal regulation, where we would recognize the location, the footprint of the near surface disposal facility as a waste disposal facility, and it would be properly recognized in the title of the deed of the land. Then this ensures that there's appropriate zoning restrictions, including buffer or attenuation zones that are enforced by the applicable regulatory agency. Should any issues arise during that period, CNO is in a position to make sure we address them. We have the right people, the right resources at this Chalk River site to ensure that there's long-term monitoring of the near surface disposal facility. Next slide, please. At Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, we have a comprehensive environmental and effluent monitoring programs for the Chalk River site. This includes monitoring the Ottawa River. Many of our employees live close to the site, work at the site, and utilize the Ottawa River. So we're as interested in protecting it as you are. We monitor water quality and we monitor the fish. There are no impacts, nor are there any predicted impacts from the near surface disposal facility or the operation of the Chalk River site. This environmental and effluent monitoring program will be expanded to include the wastewater treatment plant that we have proposed for NSDF. It is a controlled discharge where we will monitor the treated effluent and ensure it meets our benchmarks or our effluent discharge criteria before we discharge it into the environment. The details of this program have been developed into a detailed fault monitoring program, which we will be posting on our website very soon, and soliciting the public and Indigenous and any interested parties for feedback on what we propose for a detailed environmental assessment fault monitoring program for the near surface disposal facility. This program has been the topic of previous NSDF webinars, and you can find that on our YouTube page. What I just want to also recognize is as the project or as the proposed facility, if we proceed, each phase in the facility's lifetime or life cycle, as we go through each phase, from construction to operations to closure, to decommissioning closure, we do require Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission's approval to do so. And that automatically triggers public and Indigenous engagement formally. However, CNL is committed to informal or continuing our dialogue and engagement with the public and Indigenous throughout the lifetime of the near surface disposal facility. Over to you, Sandra.
Okay, so this is our last fact or fiction. CNL is engaging local Indigenous communities to ensure Indigenous rights and interests are fully represented. Fact or fiction? We'll get the results here in a second. So 95% of you are correct. This is a fact. So since 2016, CNL has had ongoing dialogue with more than 16 Indigenous communities and organizations with traditional territory or modern day interests in the region. CNL is working to ensure that Indigenous rights and interests are represented, particularly with regards to protection of the environment and valued components such as species used for harvesting. Next slide. So CNL is continuing to engage with the Indigenous communities and organizations, and will continue this should the project proceed. This isn't something we're doing just to get approval for the project. We are committed to working on and developing long-term meaningful relationships. Local Indigenous communities are engaging with CNL on the NSDF project to ensure Indigenous rights and values are represented. CNL did submit a final environmental impact statement before Christmas in December, and we are currently responding to comments from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission regarding outstanding information related to Indigenous engagement. A big part of this is actually including more recent engagements, so those that have happened between July of 2020 up until as live as possible, so the end of March of 2021. CNL is planning on resubmitting the final EIS in the coming weeks to the CNSC. And once the EIS is accepted by the CNSC, commission hearing would be set by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. So that is the end of our Q&A. Our fact and fiction. And now we can move on to Q&A. And I'll turn it over to Mitch.
Thanks, Sandra. So Sandra's right. We are on to the Q&A session for the NSDF portion. I do recognize that we are running a little behind time because of the slow technical start there, but we'll try to get to every relevant question, and if we have stuff outside the scope of NSDF, we'll commit to getting back to that person at a later time. So first question we had come in was from an anonymous attendee. How does the Nsdf compare to the installation at Port Granby? Similarities and differences, please.
Yeah, Mitch, it's Sandra. I can take this one. So I actually worked on the Port Hope and Port Granby projects for 8 years before joining the Nsdf team. So I feel very comfortable answering this question. So for the most part, the designs between the Nsdf and the Port Granby facility are very similar. They both have an engineered containment mound and purpose designed wastewater treatment plants. The baseliner and cover systems contain both natural and synthetic layers. They both have drainage systems that would capture contaminated water for treatment prior to discharge to the environment. And as mentioned, we do have specially designed water treatment plants at both facilities. So some of the differences that I would note would be the wastewater treatment plant technology is slightly different because of the different waste types. For the Nsdf project, we will be using chemical precipitation, which was found to be very effective based on pilot scale testing that was done as part of our design. There are some differences in the baseliner and cover due to climate differences. So up here in the Ottawa Valley, we do have much colder winters, which was something for me to get used to when I moved back up. But so while they're very similar, that the frost and the climate did have to get taken into effect. We have, CNL is one company, so we have had the opportunity to take some lessons learned into account from the Port Granby project and apply that to the Nsdf. So one thing that we are doing a little bit differently is we will only have one cell open at a time. So we want to limit as much as possible the amount of contact water that gets in contact with the waste. So we're doing this through the installation of interim cover systems so that we can direct as much water away from the waste as possible.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. We've got another question that's somewhat related, but it's more global. So what would you compare Nsdf to globally? Is there another built installation that closely mirrors what you plan to install for Nsdf?
Thanks, Mitch. It's Megan. I can take that one. So as Sandra just mentioned, she just addressed a question about Port Hope and Port Granby. So obviously in Canada, we do have something that's similar, but a little bit different. I would also point to international examples within the US. And the reason I point to the US is that the mission that we have at Chalk River is a very large site cleanup mission. And that's what Nsdf, or the Near Surface Disposal Facility, is supporting. There are other sites, nuclear sites within the US that are also undertaking a very large cleanup mission. What that means is that we have very similar waste streams in contaminated soils and demolition debris. And what I mean is very large volumes of low-level waste. So, Nsdf is designed for to receive upwards of 1 million cubic meters of waste. And that is because we expect that is a large volume of waste because of our cleanup mission at the Chalk River site. So we look at examples of other facilities, nuclear facilities undertaking large cleanup missions. So I would point to facilities like Oak Ridge or Hanford in the States. Now, that said, design isn't exactly like the concept of having a near surface disposal facility to facilitate the cleanup mission. It is very analogous. But what's different between all the facilities is that it's specifically Nsdf and the engineered containment system is specifically designed for the conditions at the Chalk River site, right? So, our weather, our precipitation is taken into account. The seismic activity of the site is taken into account to demonstrate, what is to plan out the best construction method for the near surface disposal facility. Also, Sandra mentioned the waste inventory can be different from site to site, as in the contaminants in inventory. So your wastewater treatment plant has to make sure it's specific to removing contaminants that you expect in your waste. So I would point to, in conclusion, other nuclear facilities that are undertaking a large cleanup mission. Back to you, Mitch.
Okay, thanks, Megan. I have a question on kind of the supply side of things. Will the supplies used in both the cover cross-system section and baseliner system cross-section be Canadian sourced? Why or why not?
That's a great question. And in fact, when we prepare our environmental impact statement, we have to consider where can the materials for construction come from so that we can appropriately estimate our greenhouse gas when it's delivered to the site. As well as, what is the traffic going to look like? What is the increase of traffic? So when we do have technical specifications for each of the components of the base and cap system, and we've identified potential sources of where that can be sourced from. Of course, that is going to be up to our construction contractor to make sure they meet the technical specifications and identify where the materials are going to be sourced from. But we have confirmed that most materials for construction of the base and liner system can be sourced in Canada. And some very much in the county, and Renfrew County or the Pontiac. What I would say the unique components would be the geomembrane in the HDPE liner. So we have done some testing, as we mentioned, for different candidates of geomembranes and identified a number of candidates that would meet our design life and exceed our design life. So those specifications need to be met.
Okay, thanks, Megan. We do have a question from Lily that would like us to expand our Indigenous consultation for both projects. So I'm proposing, since it's a question related to both projects, we answer that one at the end from both projects once we've had NPD have a chance to answer that. We have a follow-up one on the Port Granby. Oh no, wait, sorry, I've got. A timeline question, probably important. It didn't come out in this presentation. So can we give a sense of when you think that the time of completion for the Nsdf will be done? Do we have an anticipated time for the completion of Nsdf? Sorry.
Sure, I'll take this one, Mitch. So the answer is we have predictions. So right now we are waiting for approval from the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission to start construction. So once we do get that acceptance, the construction is expected to last about 2 to 3 years. So we would be looking at probably 2024 or 2025 before operation of the Nsdf. Operation is expected to last about 50 years. And then we would move into closure activities. So I guess it depends on what you would look at as completion. But so construction completion would be within 2 to 3 years of getting acceptance to start. And then operationally, it would be about 50 years.
Okay, well, we've got about 4 more questions, but I do know that we need to get through the NPD presentation. So perhaps if we have time at the end, we'll come back to some of these, but I think we'll hand it over to Katie now to start the NPD fact or fiction. Thanks.
Good morning. Thanks, Mitch, and thanks, Megan and Sandra. So very similar format. We'll have a statement. We're looking for you guys to vote on whether you think the statement is fact or fiction. So maybe we'll move to the first statement, please. Okay, NPD was the first nuclear reactor in Canada to supply energy to the electrical power grid. So take a minute and let us know if you think that's a fact or a fiction. Okay, and 86% say fact, and you would be correct. So nuclear power demonstration, or the Npd reactor, is located near Ralston, Ontario, and it made history in 1962 when it generated electricity from nuclear power for the first time in Canada. It was a prototype for the CANDU design, and CANDU reactors now generate consistently more than 60% of Ontario's electricity with carbon-free nuclear electrical power. So the Npd reactor produced clean energy and served as a training center for 25 years. When, having fulfilled its purpose, it was shut down in 1987. So after the safe and controlled shutdown, the first stages of decommissioning were completed, which included defueling the reactor and transfer of nuclear fuel and heavy water off-site for storage at Chalk River. And since then, the site has been in a safe shutdown state for more than 30 years. Next slide, please. So here we just wanted to show you a few of those historical photos from the start of Npd, from the construction and the startup activities. So on the left-hand side here, you can see the excavation that goes quite deep into the ground, into the bedrock, 25 meters down, where the basement and the foundations were poured. Top middle image is again a construction picture. You can see in the foreground the foundation walls going up, no building shell yet. And in the background there, some Quonset huts for storage during construction, and the construction camp way back on the top right of that image. And that area later became the training center. Bottom middle image, you can see the vessel where the fuel went during operation. That's being delivered for installation. Top right is the area called the West Vault, and there you can see the closure plugs, or the end fittings on the fuel channels. So they run horizontally, and this would have been final inspection work before they loaded fuel for the first time. And then the bottom right-hand image is the control room at Npd, and this picture was taken on April 11th, which is the first criticality, first time we had criticality at Npd. We'll move on to our next fact or fiction. So the next statement is, in-situ disposal has never been done before in the nuclear industry. So can you take a minute and weigh in? Is this a fact or a fiction? Okay, and the results are fiction, and with 84% voting fiction, and that is correct. So in-situ disposal has been successfully completed at a number of nuclear sites worldwide since the 1960s. The nuclear industry has used in-situ disposal to safely decommission power and research reactors in a number of locations. Examples are Nebraska, South Carolina, Idaho, and Puerto Rico. And in relation to Npd, we believe it's especially a suitable technique for Npd because of Npd's unique below ground configuration. That very deep picture of the excavation into bedrock that we saw in the previous slide really gives you some scale as to how the facility is located. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about some examples of other reactors that have been decommissioned in this way. So on the left-hand side is the Hallam reactor near Lincoln, Nebraska. And this was a sodium-cooled graphite moderated reactor, a bit bigger than Npd. It was a 75 megawatt electric as compared to Npd's only 20 megawatt electric. But similar plan took place here. Fuel, highly activated components are removed, and the metal structures, the vessels, and the rest of the facility is entombed in grout and left in place. So the other images on the right-hand side of the slide are the bonus reactor in Puerto Rico, and also the experimental breeder reactor in Idaho. These reactors all started operation similar time frame to NPD in the early or mid 60s. Many of them are located close to water, similar to the Npd reactor. And as I mentioned, all of these facilities, the fuel and the higher activity components were removed before the facilities were grouted in place. Next slide, please. Okay, so the next factor fiction statement. According to the International Atomic Energy, or the IAEA, entombment should never be used for nuclear facilities. Take a minute. Is this a fact or a fiction? Okay, and the results of the vote, fiction at 92%. You guys are doing really well on our fact and fiction today. I don't think there's any where we've had to correct the information that's out there, so that's great news. So according to the IAEA, entombment in which all or part of a facility is encased in a structurally long-lived material should only be considered a solution under exceptional circumstances. And we agree that entombment is not considered a decommissioning strategy in most cases. The counter to that, though, is that the design and the construction of NPD, we believe, make it suitable for in-situ disposal. So these exceptional criteria that we meet with the NPD facility are its location. So the facility is 25 meters below grade in the bedrock. It has a thick concrete basement structure, and it has limited quantities of long-lived isotopes. The other aspect to consider is that the remaining radioactivity, the majority of that radioactivity is securely trapped inside the metals of the reactor components. And these will take thousands of years to corrode. And these are some of the main reasons that we believe that NPD is a suitable candidate for in-situ disposal. Next slide, please. So this slide has a couple of graphics to help sort of reinforce what we just talked about, that the reactor is deep in the bedrock, that there are thick concrete basements that that forms the structure. And NPD has been in a deferred decommissioning state for more than 30 years. We've done a lot of work and developed a safety case that demonstrates that the design and the location of NPD make it a suitable candidate for in-situ disposal. And the other thing to note is that the risks associated with using in-situ disposal are significantly lower than other viable options. So maybe just a couple things to point out. On the left-hand image, you can see truly how thick the concrete walls are in some areas. And so that helps us out to contain the radioactivity that remains, in addition to the fact that that radioactivity is embedded into the metal of the remaining reactor components. Next slide, please. Okay, our next fact and fiction. CNL's proposal for in-situ disposal will contaminate the river and affect drinking water for residents downstream. Just take a minute and let me know if you think that's fact or fiction. And the results are fiction at 92%. So everyone's acing the test today. So that is fiction. Drinking water and the Ottawa River are not at risk from the Npd Closure project. The design helps us to contain and isolate the contamination, and that's going to protect the surrounding environment. Next slide, please. So I'm going to touch on a few things that we've already mentioned in this presentation, and that's that the radioactive inventory is contained. That's because the majority of the radioactivity is embedded in the metal of the reactor systems, and that's going to take a very long time to corrode. We have thick underground concrete walls that provide a barrier to slow the movement of contaminants. And we're going to be filling the remaining void space with grout, and that will create an alkaline environment, which also limits the solubility of many contaminants. The other aspect is that we're going to isolate the reactor systems and the facility structure. And that's done by filling much of the facility with grout, which further strengthens the natural isolation that's provided by the bedrock and ensures protection from environmental processes such as climate change. So CNL has undertaken thorough and detailed modeling of potential releases after the proposed closure to understand how our plan could affect the Ottawa River. And this scientific analysis demonstrates that the decommissioning project will protect the Ottawa River and have no negative impacts. The final grout design, a comprehensive study of geology of the site, and detailed earthquake assessment all contributed to this finding. CNL will also continue to have an extensive monitoring system and program in place and mitigation strategies for the worst case scenarios to make sure that the Ottawa River remains protected no matter what. Currently, CNL conducts regular monitoring at the Npd site, and that monitoring will continue into the decommissioning and closure phase for Npd to demonstrate the safe performance and continued environmental protection at the Npd site. Next slide, please. I think we are on to our last factor fiction at Npd. So the statement here is CNL will keep the ventilation stack after the project is complete so that the chimney swift can keep its popular roosting spot. Is this fact or fiction? I'll give you a few more moments to cast your vote. And the results are at 92% fact. And you guys are right again. Through consultation with experts, CNL determined that leaving the stack was the best option to provide habitat and help us preserve this species at risk. The birds have been using the ventilation stack at Npd as a roosting site for a number of years. And since that stack was identified as a roosting site, CNL has been tracking the numbers at the site. We believe it may be one of the largest chimney swift roosts in Canada. Next slide, please. So you can see the iconic red and white striped ventilation stack, the top of it on the image on the left, and what you can see from ground level and looking up on the image on the right. At one time, there can be more than 1,000 birds at the Npd site. The stack is going to be preserved, as I mentioned, and maintained to support the chimney swift population that uses it as a roost. CNL is committed to this. We have a camera that monitors the stop of the stack, and we do daily counts. Our environmental protection staff look after that to watch the chimney swifts during the time that they're roosting at Npd. We also take part in a national roost count days. We invite public and the stakeholders to participate in that counting. As you can see on the image on the right, sometimes we're lucky enough to have people come to the site and see that live and in person. But recently we've done that as a virtual count. So please stay tuned. In May, we'll have an invite for you to join us again to count the chimney swifts. I believe that is the end of the fact and fictions for NPD. So I think we're moving on to a Q&A period.
Yes, that's correct. Thanks, Katie. We now have some time for Q&A on NPD, and then if we have some additional time, we'll get to some of the flow over questions from the Nsdf, because I think some of them actually play into both projects, so we might be able to cover them off. Sandra and Megan, stand at the ready. Okay, the first question on NPD actually has to do with the kind of the historical significance of it. So I think, as some people may be aware, the NPD site is, there's a historical plaque, and it's, I believe it may be, I'm not sure, maybe others can confirm this, it may be a Canadian heritage site. And the concern is that by entombing it, we are grouting it, we are somehow affecting that heritage and the access to the heritage of the site. So I don't know if this is more of a comment, but I don't know if the project wants to comment on the heritage, if in fact you know, there are artifacts there. We know that a new museum is started up in Deep River that is trying to take into account the decommissioning that's happening right now, and some of the history, and making sure that some of these artifacts are found. Certainly, I know that the site itself will continue to have the plaque up there on the highway, to remind people of this site, but I don't know if there's anything the project would like to add to the heritage designation of NPD.
So I think, Mitch, you hit the nail on the head that there is a museum in Deep River where we're making efforts, where they are making efforts to preserve some of the heritage of some of these important aspects of ACL and CNL history. And although it would be nice to be able to continue to visit the reactor as a historical site, it is really important to convert the facility to a safe and permanent waste facility in order for us to reduce Canada's legacy liabilities. And that grout piece is used to stabilize the underground portion of the facility and to form part of the barriers that contain and isolate the remaining waste that allow it to decay where it is in place. And I think, on the note of it being a Canadian heritage site, I think so you're right, there is absolutely a plaque, but we should look into, I'm not sure if it's a Canadian heritage site.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure on that, whether it's Ontario or what the plaque says, but I have to go confirm that. But recognize that the history there is important, and the history to the industry in Ontario and Canada is important. So it's a good note for us to continue to preserve that history in ways that we can, as we move forward with the closure of that site, and making sure that it's put into a safe place that protects the environment. So thank you for that comment.
Mitch, I'd just like to add in a little bit there. Thanks, so Katie. There's a couple of years at least before we begin work if we receive approval from our regulator to do this. So it's safe and comfortable to visit the NPD site, and once we have a relinquishment of some of the COVID controls, we certainly encourage the public to take advantage of the opportunity to come and see the site firsthand. We can take people for a walk through the reactor, and they can really get an appreciation of the things that Katie described earlier, the robustness of the concrete, the location below grade, etc. So certainly invite people to reach out to our stakeholder engagement team if that's an interest to do so.
Thanks, Katie and Brian. I'm going to go back to the Nsdf question that kind of has to do with both projects, and it's around Indigenous engagement. But there's kind of three questions here that I think we can kind of wrap into one, and it's so one of the questions is around expansion on our Indigenous consultation for both projects, and I think Nsdf did a good job of in some of their slides explaining how we've ramped that up. And then there's a question around the idea that the perception is that we're being delayed by the Indigenous consultation side of things, and that because we don't have the appropriate information on Indigenous engagement, that somehow poorly reflects on the projects. And so and then the kind of third one that wraps up into this is the idea that and it has to do with consultation and the land around, and whether there is a right for First Nations and communities to have more of a say in whether these projects go forward or not. And so I'll wrap all those together because I think they kind of have to do with each other. What I'll say to start off, well, give Nsdf and Npd some time to think and reflect on this, is that the regulator certainly isn't prescriptive, and certainly not on Indigenous engagement. And Indigenous, our relationship with Indigenous communities is extremely important, not just to the projects, but to CNL. And we want to get these relationships right, and we know that takes time. And so that's why both the regulator and the project don't want to go forward until we have those relationships right. And that's extremely important, both to both parties. Well, all three parties involved in this process. So I'll say that, and I'll pass along to both Npd. Why don't we start with Npd, since it is Npd's presentation, but then we'll follow on with if Nsdf has any comments on those three questions.
Katie, you want me, or do you want to take this one?
I'll let you start us off, Brian.
Sure, okay. Yeah, so as Mitch said, I mean, CNL has really worked hard in the last 4 years to develop relationships with First Nations and Métis people in and around our projects. This includes the Algonquins of Ontario, the Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, the Métis Nation of Ontario, Curve Lake First Nations, ANTC, and others that have expressed interest in the project. And these First Nation communities and Métis communities have provided a lot of input into the project. CNL has addressed many of the comments that they've shared. We've had numerous meetings with communities resulting from that. And CNL is currently proactively engaging on a number of specific community interests and concerns. We are following the community's preference or protocol on how they want to engage. It's different for every community, and CNL is very respectful of that. And we've produced extensive documentation to support this engagement. And as Mitch said, getting that right is very important. We want to make sure that the key interests and concerns that the Indigenous communities have shared with us are properly documented in the environmental impact statement. It's important to CNL as well. Our regulator, Canadian Nuclear, Safety Commission, relies on that documentation to be able to present a fair and balanced view of our applications to the Commission. So it does take time, but that time is well worth spent, and CNL is working to get that right in our documentation. Megan or Sandra, do you want to add anything into that from Nsdf in particular?
Yeah, I'll just add, oops, A couple things to start. So similar to what Brian said, the NSDF project has been engaging with First Nations and Métis on both the Ontario and Quebec side since 2016. Similar to Brian, some of our more local Indigenous communities and organizations are the Métis Nation of Ontario, the Algonquins of Ontario, Algonquins of Pikwakanagan First Nation, communities of the Williams Treaties First Nations, Kebewak, and Kitigan-Zibi First Nation. So that's not a complete list, but those are some that have been very engaged in the project. We've held community meetings with many of these First Nations and Métis. We've had workshops on specific topics. We've been providing documentations and presentations as requested. And we do have memorandums of understanding with a number of these communities and organizations to provide some capacity for the engagement in the projects. A question was asked around the final EIS and the Indigenous engagement. So likely what I would say on that is that the biggest thing that we are changing between the final EIS that we submitted in December and what I'll call the final is our freeze date for Indigenous engagement activities in our 2020 December draft was June 30th, 2020. So what we will be doing is updating the final EIS to include Indigenous engagement activities up to the end of March and possibly into early April. So this will give a very fulsome picture of what's happened in the last few months. You know, this is a very active part of the NSDF project. And like I said earlier, just because the EIS is submitted, this doesn't mean we're not committed to ongoing engagement. We are committed to this, and should the project proceed, we look forward to Indigenous input as the project moves forward. I'll just turn it over to Megan for the last little part.
Thanks, Sandra and Brian. I guess the one aspect I would make sure that we make clear, because this is often a point of confusion, is who has the duty to consult, and that is the Crown or the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission as a responsible authority for this project. So Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, both the NSDF and NPD projects, our role is to support that consultation through our engagement activities. So we engage, we provide information, we answer questions, and it's always with the intent of seeking understanding, making sure that meaningful opportunities are provided. If, you know, oftentimes that does mean providing capacity to be involved, and that where there's ongoing issues or concerns, that we make meaningful commitments to those Indigenous groups to, you know, make sure that we're addressing their concerns as if the project proceeds. So just it's you know, important to clarify. CNL's role is to engage, not to consult. Consultation rests with the Crown.
Okay, thanks everyone for helping out with that, with the answer to those three questions. Okay, we'll move on to some NPD specific questions now. First one from Joan Lougheed. What are your plans for the land surrounding the plant itself?
I'll jump in and take this one. Thank you for that question. So this is important to note. The NPD waste facility that will be created as part of the Npd Closure project sits on a very small footprint of the full NPD site, about 1%. So there is land east and west and south that is currently and will remain owned by ACL. CNL has done characterization and investigation of those lands to confirm that they're not impacted by the past operations of NPD. But the discussion and the decisions about what will happen with the rest of the land are still ongoing and must very much include ACL as the landowner as to what the final decision are.
Okay, thanks, Katie. Next is similar to the Nsdf one, and it's a good one to have. Always a good reminder is what is the status? What's the kind of the timeline around the NPD submission and eventual, I guess, you know, if approved, the process to decommission. When would it begin? So the kind of a timeline update for everyone.
Yeah, no problem. I can provide an update on that as well. The NPD Closure project is at a different stage than Nsdf. Nsdf is working toward their final EIS submission. Similar to Nsdf though, NPD submitted a revised draft EIS to the CNSC just before Christmas. And again, we received similar feedback that we need to focus in and ensure that we have documented and done our due diligence and worked hard to engage and answer the questions of the Indigenous communities. So again, similar to Nsdf, NPD is going to be doing a new submission of this revised draft EIS within the next 4 to 6 weeks. At that point, the CNSC will do a 90-day technical review of the EIS package for NPD. And then CNL will have work to do to respond to additional information requests from the CNSC. Some of the dates beyond that are very speculative at this point, but we're hoping to address comments from the CNSC through that 90-day technical review by the end of the calendar year and be looking to submit our final EIS. And then would come a 2-part hearing, again, similar to Nsdf. And the timeline for that is not decided at this point. That hearing will be booked by the CNSC, but really earliest scenario is that decommissioning activities could begin late in 2022 and would take about 2 years to complete. And then we would move into the closure and the institutional control phase for NPD.
Okay, thank you, Katie. I'll recognize that, you know, on our agenda, we had till 11:35, we would start wrapping up. So we're 10 minutes past that. Maybe we can take one more question from because we do have a lot that's come in, and what we'll then do is whatever remaining questions we have, we will commit to answer to, and we'll send back to the entire group that's participated here. So I will give one more question to NPD, and then we'll start to wrap up. Let's see here. They're all Nsdf. This is a question in comparing NPD to Douglas Point. So if in-situ disposal is applicable to NPD, what's the difference with, say, the Douglas Point site, and why would it not be used there?
Sure, I can take that one, Mitch. It's a good question. I mean, when CNL evaluates an approach for any decommissioning project, we go through you know, a very careful evaluation of the facility we're dealing with. We characterize and understand the facility. So some of the benefits that NPD have that make it suitable for in-situ don't really exist with the Douglas Point project. So NPD is quite small, low power, located below ground. If we had to dismantle that facility instead of performing in-situ disposal, it would involve a lot of direct cutting and handling of materials by people. Douglas Point, on the other hand, is primarily above ground. It's a larger power reactor. It's not as large as you know, sort of current power reactors, but it's still 200 megawatts. So it's probably about 10 times bigger in terms of power output than NPD. It's you could rely on heavy equipment to perform much of the dismantling of that project, and therefore it does suit itself better to be dismantled and to manage the waste, you know, in a design waste storage facility, either on site or elsewhere, until permanent solutions are available. Katie, anything to add? No? Okay. Thank you, Mitch. Good question.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah. So we'll begin to wrap up. I will note that there is some questions about kind of like what our next activities are related to public engagement. So and the pandemic. So I'll wrap up by answering that question. We'll continue with these webinars, and we've started up some technical briefings now too, and some virtual open houses. And this is all in response, obviously, to social distancing measures and safety of the public during this pandemic. You know, when it's safe to do so, we will begin to get back out into the physical public world. So in answer to that question, yes, our desire is, when it's safe to do so, to get back out and do some stuff actually out in the public. We do plan actually to open a storefront at some point. We had planned this just before the pandemic, and the pandemic hit, and then obviously, you know, storefronts were not a safe thing to do at that point. So we do want to get out back into the public. We do want to continue these webinars and our virtual open houses, though, because we still think they're good tools to access, and you know, for those who aren't around the valley who want to still learn about this, it's an easy way to interact with us. So we'll continue to do these as well. So I guess the answer to that question is we want to do both, and when it's safe to do so, we will. Okay, so I know Margot's told me in the background that we are going to be doing a kind of a wrap-up poll to see if there's any sort of feedback and how this was conducted. But so do stay on for that if you can. With that, I will thank everyone for their time. I apologize for going a little bit over time, and we hope that you can join us at the next one of these webinars. So thank you very much, and be safe and take care.
Thank you.